My family told everyone I failed. I sat quietly at my brother's promotion ceremony. Then his base commander looked at me and whispered, "Wait, you're?" The room stopped. Even my father couldn't speak. "I'm David Walsh, I'm 42 years old, and for 20 years my own family treated me like the black sheep, the failure who washed out of West Point." Then, at my brother's promotion ceremony, in a room full of military brass, his commanding officer, a 4-star general, looked right at me, saluted, and shattered their world with a single sentence. Before I tell you what he said and how it exposed a web of lies that almost tore my family apart for good, do me a favor and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always good to know who you're talking to. The invitation felt as cold as the cheap paper it was printed on. "Marilyn and Roy Walsh request the pleasure of your company," it read, but the handwritten note from my mother at the bottom told the real story. "David, we know it's a long way, but it would mean a lot to Eric if you were there. Not that it would mean a lot to her or to my father. Just to Eric. Always to Eric. My younger brother, Eric, was the golden child. The one who followed in my father's footsteps, who climbed the ranks, whose picture sat proudly on the mantelpiece. My picture? It was in a shoebox somewhere in the attic, probably. I almost threw the invitation away. Going back there, into that nest of quiet judgment and polite disappointment, felt like willingly walking into a fire. Every family gathering was the same. My father, retired Colonel Roy Walsh, would hold court, telling war stories. My mother, Marilyn, would float around, her smile never quite reaching her eyes when she looked at me. My aunts, uncles, and cousins would ask me the same tired questions. "So, David, still finding your feet? Or doing anything interesting?" They weren't really asking. They were just reminding me and themselves that I was the one who didn't measure up. But something made me go this time. Maybe it was a flicker of that old, stubborn hope that things could be different. Maybe I just wanted to see my brother's big day. So I booked the flight, rented a car, and drove to the base, my stomach in knots the entire way. The ceremony was in a large, formal hall on base. I found a seat in the back, trying to be invisible. My family was all in the front row, beaming. They saw me come in. My mother gave a tight little wave. My father just nodded, his gaze sweeping past me as if I were part of the wallpaper. During the ceremony, I was a ghost. At the reception afterwards, I was a ghost with a drink in his hand. Then General Hammond arrived. He was the base commander, a man who radiated authority. He shook Eric's hand, clapped him on the shoulder, and said a few words to my father. I was standing off to the side, near the bar, getting ready to make my quiet escape. That's when it happened. General Hammond's eyes scanned the room, and they locked onto mine. A flicker of confusion, then recognition, then something else, respect. He excused himself from my father and brother and started walking towards me. Every step he took seemed to echo in the sudden quiet that was falling around us. People noticed. My family noticed. He stopped right in front of me. He was a tall man, but in that moment he seemed to stand even taller. He looked me up and down, and a slow, knowing smile spread across his face. He leaned in, his voice a low rumble, but in the hush, it carried. "Wait a minute," he said, his eyes sharp. "I know you." He then turned slightly so my father could hear. "Colonel Walsh," he said, his voice now formal. "I believe you know your son, but you may not be aware you're in the presence of the architect of Operation Silent Dawn." He then faced me again, straightened his back, and his hand snapped up in a crisp, perfect salute. The room stopped. My father's jaw dropped. He stared at me, his face a mask of utter, speechless shock. The world my family had built, the story they had told themselves for 20 years, had just been blown to pieces. And the shrapnel was about to fly. That look on my father's face. It took me back 20 years, to a different room, a different kind of silence. It was the day I told him I was leaving West Point. I was 20 years old, top of my class, on the fast track to becoming the third generation of Walsh men to command. My father saw his own legacy in me. He'd already planned out my entire career, all the way to a general star. To him, it was a sacred duty. To me, it had become a cage. The truth was, I wasn't a washout. I was a recruit. A different kind of recruit. A quiet man in a plain civilian suit had pulled me aside one day. He didn't work for the army, not officially. He spoke about a different kind of service, one with no parades, no medals on a uniform, no promotions announced in the base newsletter. He talked about stopping threats before they ever became headlines. He talked about a world of shadows, and he said they needed people like me. People who could think 3 moves ahead, who could blend in, who could make impossible choices in utter silence. The program had no name, no public record. To join it, David Walsh, the promising West Point cadet, had to disappear. He had to fail. I sat my parents down in the living room, the same room where my father's commendations and medals gleamed from a glass case. "I'm leaving the academy," I said. The words felt like stones in my mouth. My mother, Marilyn, gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth, and her eyes, wide with alarm, darted to my father. My father didn't move for a long moment. He just stared at me, his face slowly turning a dark, dangerous shade of red. The air crackled. "You're what?" he finally roared, slamming his fist on the coffee table. The cups rattled. "You're throwing it all away? Your duty? Your family's name? For what?" "Because it's hard." "Dad, it's not that. It's complicated." I tried to explain, but I couldn't. The first rule of the program was absolute secrecy. My life and the lives of others would depend on it. "Complicated?" He spat the word out. "I'll tell you what's complicated. Explaining to everyone that my son, my eldest son, is a quitter. A coward." That word hung in the air. Coward. I looked at my mother, hoping for some kind of support, some understanding. But she just shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "David, how could you do this to him? To us?" Her pain wasn't for me. It was for the family's image, for the disruption of the perfect picture she held so dear. In that moment, I saw that her loyalty was to the structure, not to the son who was breaking it. That's when I knew I was truly alone in this. That was the beginning of the long freeze. For the next 2 decades, I lived in the shadows my recruiter had promised. I was in Benghazi when the compounds burned, not as a soldier, but as a ghost trying to pull people out of the fire. I spent 18 months in a Colombian jungle, my skin stained brown, my Spanish fluent enough to pass for a local, gathering intel on a cartel that was funding terror networks. I learned to sleep with one eye open, to trust no one, to measure every word. My only real connection to that world, my only lifeline, was a woman named Sarah Jenkins. Sarah was my handler. She was a voice on a secure line, a face in a heavily encrypted video call. She was tough, pragmatic, and saw the world in shades of threat and response. After one particularly nasty operation in the Philippines that went sideways, she was the one who pulled my file from the burn pile. "This is better than the Glade mess, at least," she'd said over the crackling satellite phone, her voice weary. "You made the right call then, David. Don't ever doubt it." The Glade mess was Derek Glade, another operative, a guy who was brilliant but reckless. On a mission in Chechnya, he'd ignored intel, gone off book, and gotten a whole team compromised. I had to make the call to pull the plug on his operation to save the wider mission, and he never forgave me for it. He was discharged, disgraced, and disappeared. Sarah's words were the only validation I ever got. They were a shield against the silence from home. The silence was deafening, but the moments they did reach out were somehow worse. I remember one Christmas. I was holed up in a safe house in Istanbul, watching snow fall over the Bosphorus. My satellite phone buzzed. It was a video call from home. I answered, my heart aching for a connection. The screen filled with the noisy, warm chaos of my family's Christmas party. Eric was showing off his new watch. My father was laughing, a cigar in his hand. "There he is, the world traveler," my Aunt Carol chirped, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Still finding yourself, David?" My father took the phone. "Son, good to see your brother made captain this year. We're all very proud." The unspoken comparison was a slap in the face. Then, I heard my Aunt Carol again in the background, not realizing I could hear. "Honestly, Marilyn, I don't know how you do it. It must be so embarrassing. We just focus on Eric, my mother replied, her voice strained. It's easier that way. Easier that way. 3 words that defined my existence in my own family. I ended the call, the cheerful sounds of their party replaced by the lonely hum of the refrigerator. But the final cut, the one that severed the last thread of hope, came a few years later. My parents had gone on a big family cruise for their 40th anniversary. I couldn't go, of course. I was in the middle of a desert somewhere, tracking a weapons smuggler. When they got back, my mother sent me a photo. It was a big, glossy picture of the whole Walsh clan, tanned and smiling on the deck of the ship. My father, my mother, Eric and his wife Jessica, all my aunts, uncles, cousins. Everyone was there. I looked for the empty space where I should have been, the gap that represented my absence. But there was no gap. They had arranged the photo to fill the space perfectly. It was a complete picture. A happy, successful whole family. And I wasn't just missing from it. It was like I had never existed at all. I stared at that photo for a long time. They hadn't just forgotten me. They had erased me. They had cropped me out of their lives. That was the moment I stopped hoping. I accepted my role as the ghost, the failure, the family secret. I poured everything I had left into my work, into the silent, thankless job of keeping the world safe for families like the one that didn't want me. And I was fine with that, or so I told myself, until I got that cold invitation and saw that look of utter shock on my father's face. In that moment, seeing his perfect world crack, I realized something. Maybe I wasn't done with them after all. Maybe, just maybe, it was time for the ghost to come home. The ride home from the base was suffocating. The air in my father's Lincoln was thick with things unsaid. My mother kept staring out the window, her hands clenched in her lap. My father gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles were white. Eric sat in the back with me, unervingly silent, his gaze fixed on the back of my father's head. The moment we walked through the front door, the fragile dam of civility burst. "General?" My father's voice was a low growl. He threw his keys on the hall table with a clatter that made us all jump. He turned to face me, his eyes burning with a cold fire I knew all too well. It wasn't pride. It was fury. "What the hell was that, David? What kind of game are you playing?" "It's not a game, Dad," I said, my voice steady. "Don't you lie to me," he roared. "Not in this house. 20 years. 20 years of letting us believe you were a disgrace. A drifter. While you were what? Playing spy? Gallivanting around with a fancy title you didn't earn. The accusation that I hadn't earned it was like a punch to the gut. The years of loneliness, of fear, of making choices that would haunt my nightmares forever, all of it dismissed as a game. "You wouldn't understand," I said quietly. "Try me," he shot back. "I can't. It's classified." That was the wrong thing to say. It was like throwing gasoline on a fire. To him, classified was a shield for his own career, a term of honor. Coming from me, it sounded like an excuse, an insult. "Classified?" He scoffed, turning away from me in disgust. "The only thing classified here is your monumental disrespect for this family." My mother finally spoke, her voice trembling. "David, all this time you could have told us. We were worried." "Were you?" I asked, looking her straight in the eye. "Were you worried? Or were you embarrassed?" She flinched, her gaze falling to the floor. And in her silence, I had my answer. It was never about me. It was about them, their reputation, their perfect family narrative. I was an inconvenient truth they had chosen to bury. Eric, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke up. "So what does it mean?" he asked, his voice tight. "Architect of Operation Silent Dawn? What is that?" I looked at my brother. In his eyes, I didn't see curiosity. I saw a flicker of the same green-eyed monster I'd seen his whole life. Jealousy. Even with his promotion, even with all the praise, the ghost in the corner had just cast a shadow over his big day. Before I could answer, the local news on the television in the corner of the room cut to a special report. "We are getting breaking news tonight about a significant national security breach," the anchor said, her face grim. "Sources inside the Pentagon are speaking of a massive data leak. potentially compromising covert operations and personnel. We all froze. My father's head snapped toward the TV. The anchor continued, "Details are still emerging, but the breach appears to be linked to a dormant network, with speculation that a high-ranking, possibly undeclared, intelligence officer may be at the center of the investigation." A cold dread washed over me. The timing was impossible. My father turned his head slowly from the TV back to me. His eyes, which had been burning with anger, were now filled with a new, horrifying emotion. Suspicion. "David," he said, his voice dangerously low. "What did you do?" Later that night, the house was quiet, but it was the loud, ringing silence of a battlefield after the first volley. I was in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. My phone, a secure satellite device I always kept with me, buzzed. It was a single, encrypted text from Sarah. "Red flag on an old network. Dormant file access triggered. The trail starts at your father's IP address." My blood ran cold. My father's IP address. It made no sense. He was retired. He didn't have that kind of access anymore. Then, a sickening thought began to form. The scene shifts unseen by me. In another room, Eric sat in my father's old study. The room was a shrine to my father's career, filled with books on military history and maps of old campaigns. On the screen of the heavy, outdated desktop computer, he was logged into a network he had no business being in. After the confrontation, fueled by a toxic cocktail of resentment and bourbon, he had come in here. He remembered my father boasting years ago about having old, deep-level access codes that were supposedly deactivated but might still have backdoors. On a whim, a dark, ugly whim, Eric had tried them. And one of them had worked. He wasn't trying to start a national security crisis. His goal was petty, pathetic. He was just trying to dig up dirt. He wanted to find my service record, to find something, anything that would prove the general title was a fluke, a desk job, something he could use to cut me back down to size in his own mind. He typed my name into a search field on the archaic interface. The screen flashed, "Access denied. File Walsh, D. Eyes only, Omega level." Frustrated, he started poking around, clicking on old directories, trying to find a chink in the armor. He clicked on a folder labeled Archived Operations, Unnamed. Then another, labeled with a single, cryptic word, Glade. The moment he clicked it, the screen went black. A single line of red text appeared. "Trap wire tripped. Payload deployed. Good night." Eric stared at the screen, the color draining from his face. He had no idea what he had just done. He hadn't just looked for dirt on his brother. He had knocked on the door of a ghost, a very dangerous ghost from my past. And he had used my family's name to do it. Back in my room, I got a second text from Sarah. "The breach isn't a hack. It's a targeted release. A dead man's switch. The Glade contingency. David, someone just woke up the devil, and they did it from inside your house." The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The breach, the timing, the IP address, Eric's jealousy. It wasn't my father. It was my brother. My own brother had tried to burn me, and in doing so, he had set the whole world on fire. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that when the blame came, it would fall on me. The mysterious, newly revealed general was the perfect scapegoat. My family wouldn't defend me. My father already suspected me. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet suburban street. They thought I was the storm. They had no idea I was the one standing in its eye. And I was the only one who knew how to stop it. My first move was no longer about clearing my name with my family. It was about survival. The next morning, the house felt like a tomb. My family moved around me like I was a contagion, speaking in whispers. The news was on every channel, the story of the Walsh breach growing with every hour. My name wasn't mentioned publicly, not yet, but the whispers from the Pentagon had become a roar. My father spent the morning on the phone in his study, his voice a low, urgent murmur. He was calling in old favors, trying to get information, to understand the magnitude of what was happening. I could hear snippets of his side of the conversation. "What do you mean you can't tell me?" I'm a retired colonel. A pause. Above my clearance? That's impossible. Another longer pause. I see. When he came out, his face was pale. The anger from the night before was gone, replaced by a deep, unsettling anxiety. He looked at me, and for the first time, I didn't see a father looking at a failed son. I saw a soldier looking at an unknown quantity, a force he didn't understand and couldn't control. The realization that he was completely out of his depth was slowly dawning on him, and it terrified him. Eric was a mess. He was jumpy, pale, avoiding my eyes. He knew he'd done something terrible, but he didn't understand what. His wife, Jessica, kept shooting him worried glances. She cornered me in the kitchen while I was making coffee. "David," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "What's going on?" "Eric, he hasn't been himself." I looked at this woman, my sister-in-law, an innocent bystander in a war she didn't even know was being fought. I couldn't tell her the truth. "It's a family mess, Jessica," I said. "Just keep an eye on him." I couldn't wait for the official investigation to swallow me whole. I had to get ahead of it. I retreated to the guest room and opened my own laptop. It looked like a standard machine, but it was a ghost. It ran on a secure, closed network that didn't technically exist. I sent a message to Sarah. He didn't just trip a wire. Glade designed that trap to do more. It wouldn't just release data. It would implicate the person who accessed it. Eric is the trigger, but Glade is the gun. Sarah agreed. The data dump is chaotic. It looks like a random release, but it's not. It's curated. It's releasing files that trace a false trail back to missions you consulted on. Glade is trying to frame you for the leak itself. He's trying to burn me for what happened in Chechnya. He wants revenge. Sarah, the Pentagon is in chaos. They're launching a full task force. They'll be looking at you hard. You have 48 hours, maybe less, before they lock you down. I don't need 48 hours. I just need to find the ghost. Glade always had a digital tell, a signature in his code. Let me hunt. For the next day, I barely moved from that room. I lived on coffee and adrenaline. The world outside, the silent accusations of my family, it all faded away. It was just me, the code, and a ghost I had to catch. It felt familiar, almost comfortable. This was my world. This was the world I had chosen over them. I found it on the morning of the second day. It wasn't in the release data. It was in the malicious code itself that Eric had unleashed. A tiny string of corrupted data, meaningless to anyone else. But I recognized it. It was a fragment of a poem by Kipling, one Glade and I had argued about years ago during a long stakeout. It was his signature, his calling card. But it was more than that. It was a backdoor. He'd left a way for himself to monitor the fallout. He was watching. The arrogance of it, the sheer hubris. It was pure Glade. And it was his mistake. I worked quickly, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I wasn't just tracking him. I was setting a trap of my own. I created a phantom file, labeling it Walsh, D. Psych Evaluation Classified. I baited it with keywords I knew he couldn't resist. Glade Incident, Reckless Endangerment, Discharge Recommendation. Then I planted it in a server I knew he'd be monitoring and attached a tracker to it, a digital beacon that would activate the moment the file was opened. Now all I could do was wait. Wait for the ghost to take the bait. And wait for the official storm to break. Came that afternoon. 2 black sedans pulled up in front of the house. 4 men in dark suits got out. They didn't knock. My father opened the door before they could. The man in the lead, a grim-faced man with tired eyes, flashed a badge. "Colonel Walsh? I'm Deputy Director Thorne, DOD. We need to speak with your son." Just then, my laptop pinged. A single, beautiful notification popped up on my screen. Beacon activated. Location: Arlington, Virginia. IP address confirmed. I had him. I closed the laptop and walked out of the room to face the men in the hall. "I'm David Walsh," I said calmly. "I believe you're looking for me, but I think the man you really want to talk to is named Derek Glade. And I know exactly where to find him." The men from the DOD weren't there to make an arrest. Not yet. They were there to secure the scene. Director Thorne was sharp. He listened to my claim about Derek Glade with a poker face, took the address I gave him, and made a quiet call. Then he turned his attention back to us. My orders are to secure this residence and everyone in it until the task force arrives, he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. No one leaves. No one makes any calls. For the next few hours, we were prisoners in our own home. My family huddled in the living room, a vortex of fear and resentment. My father paced, my mother wrung her hands, and Eric looked like he was about to be physically sick. I just sat in an armchair, watching them, feeling a strange, cold calm. The waiting was almost over. The doorbell rang again just after dusk. This time it was General Hammond. He wasn't in his dress uniform. He was in his working uniform, and he looked like he hadn't slept in 2 days. He wasn't alone. Sarah Jenkins was with him. She gave me a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. Thorne met them at the door. "General, we've secured the location." "Thank you, Director," Hammond said, his eyes sweeping over my family before landing on me. "I'm taking it from here. This is now officially a family matter I've been asked to mediate. For national security reasons." He walked into the living room, and the air crackled with his authority. Sarah stood by the door, a silent, watchful guardian. "Please, everyone, sit down," Hammond said. It wasn't a request. My father, a full colonel, sat. My mother sank into the sofa. Eric looked like his legs could no longer hold him. Hammond remained standing, a folder in his hand. He looked like a judge about to deliver a verdict. "There has been a serious breach of national security," he began, his voice calm and measured. "The investigation has been swift. We know what happened, and it started right here in this house." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. He looked directly at Eric. "Eric Walsh," he said, his voice flat, "on the night of your promotion, you used your father's old credentials to illegally access a secure DoD network." Eric choked out a sob, his face crumbling. I didn't mean. I was just looking." "You were looking for information on your brother?" Hammond finished for him, his voice devoid of sympathy. "Your actions, born out of professional jealousy, were foolish and reckless. You tripped a wire you didn't understand, and for that you will face a formal reprimand. You can forget about that promotion for at least the next 5 years. You're lucky you get to keep your career at all." My mother gasped, putting her hand on Eric's shoulder. My father just stared at the floor, his face ashen. This was the first domino. Hammond let the silence hang for a moment before he continued. "But," he said, and the word cut through the tension, "while your actions were the key in the lock, Eric, you were not the one who built the bomb." He turned his gaze to my father. "Roy, you and I have known each other a long time. We served together. But you don't know your own son." He then looked at me. "For 20 years, David Walsh has served this country in a capacity that few can comprehend and none can speak of. He has operated in the darkest corners of the world, making sacrifices you can't even imagine, all while his own family believed he was a failure." He opened the folder in his hand. "The man responsible for this leak is a disgraced ex-operative named Derek Glade, a man who was removed from service after his recklessness nearly cost us a dozen lives in Chechnya. The man who made that call, the hard but right call to remove him, was your son, David." He pulled out a single sheet of paper. "Glade spent years building a digital dead man switch, a trap designed to release compromising data, and more importantly, to frame the person who exposed him. Eric's foolishness woke the beast, but the beast had a name, and it was Derek Glade. As of an hour ago, thanks to a digital tracker planted by David, Derek Glade is in federal custody in Arlington, Virginia." The room was utterly silent. The only sound was the ragged breathing of my brother. The second domino had fallen. Now for the last one. General Hammond walked over to the coffee table and placed the file on it. It landed with a soft, heavy thud. "Roy," he said, his voice softer now, "I've been authorized to show you this. It's been heavily redacted, but it's enough. This is why your son had to keep his secrets. My father looked at the file as if it were a snake. Hesitantly, he reached out and opened it. His eyes scanned the first page. I knew what he was seeing. It wasn't a list of promotions or awards. It was a list of operations, codenamed and dated. Next to each one, a single summary line. Operation Silent Dawn. Sole operative. Neutralized terror cell leadership. Prevented dirty bomb attack on a European capital. Operation Desert Ghost. Deep cover infiltration. Gathered intel leading to the dismantling of a weapons trafficking ring. Wounded in action. Self-evacuated. Operation River Shadow hostage rescue. 5 diplomats recovered. No casualties. My father's hands began to shake. He slowly lifted his head, and his eyes met mine. The anger, the suspicion, the pride, it was all gone. All that was left was a deep, gut-wrenching shame. The foundation of his world, his black and white code of honor and duty, had been shattered into a million pieces. His son, the quitter, the coward, was a hero on a scale he could barely comprehend. A hero he had scorned for 2 decades. Marilyn, my mother, was openly weeping now, not for Eric, but for me, for the years lost, for the cruelty of their judgment. In that moment I felt no triumph, no satisfaction in their pain. I just felt a profound, aching sadness for the family we could have been. The silence stretched on, filled only by the sound of my family's perfect world breaking apart. The truth hadn't just come out. It had burned the whole house down. The days that followed were quiet and strange. General Hammond and his team left as quickly as they had arrived. The men in suits disappeared. The news cycle moved on, reporting only that a major security threat had been neutralized and a disgruntled former contractor was in custody. My name and my family's remained out of the press. The Pentagon, my world, knew how to bury its secrets. But inside the walls of my childhood home, the truth was a living thing. It sat with us at the dinner table. It followed us down the hallways. The old dynamics were shattered, but new ones hadn't formed yet. We were all just floating in the wreckage. Derek Glade was gone, facing a lifetime in a place where he couldn't hurt anyone ever again. Eric was in a different kind of prison. He was stripped of his new rank before it was even official and was scheduled to appear before a disciplinary board. He walked around the house like a ghost, his face etched with a shame so deep it was painful to look at. He found me in the backyard one afternoon. I was just staring at the old oak tree we used to climb as kids. "David," he said, his voice hoarse. There are no words. Sorry isn't big enough. I turned to look at him. My brother, the golden child, now tarnished and broken. I didn't feel anger anymore, just a vast, weary pity. "Why Eric?" I asked. It was the only question that mattered. He shook his head, looking down at his feet. "I don't know. All my life I did everything right. Everything Dad wanted. I followed the path. But you just left. And even as a failure, you were still the one he measured me against. The ghost in the room. When Hammond said your name, I just snapped. I hated that you had a secret. A world that was bigger than ours. It was ugly. It was pathetic. And I am so sorry." He was crying. Real, racking sobs. I had never seen my brother cry like that, not even as a child. "The board is next week," I said quietly. "I'm going to make a call. I'll tell them you cooperated. That your actions, while wrong, inadvertently helped us catch Glade. It might save your career." He looked up, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Why? After what I did?" "Because you're still my brother, Eric," I said. "And this family has had enough destruction." He just nodded, unable to speak. That was the start of something new between us. Not forgiveness, not yet. But a clearing in the rubble where something might one day grow. My conversation with my mother was harder. I found her in the kitchen, staring into a cup of cold tea. She looked 10 years older. "Your father is lost," she said, not looking at me. "Everything he believed in has been turned upside down." "And you, Mom?" I asked. "What do you believe in?" She finally looked up, her eyes swimming with tears. "I believe I failed you," she whispered. "I knew, David. not the details. But I knew you weren't just drifting. I could see a weight in your eyes, a burden. I knew you were doing something important. But I was a coward. I was so afraid of your father's disapproval, so caught up in keeping the peace, in maintaining the image of our perfect family, that I chose to be silent. I chose to let you carry that weight alone. My silence was a betrayal. And I don't know if you can ever forgive me for it. Her confession was the missing piece. It wasn't just ignorance. It was a choice to sacrifice me for her own comfort. I don't know either, Mom, I said, and the honesty of it hung between us. But this is the first true thing you've said to me in 20 years. And that's a start. The final conversation was with my father. He asked me to join him in his study, the room where he had called me a quitter. He was sitting behind his desk, but he looked small, diminished. The gleaming metals in the case behind him seemed to mock him. He didn't offer excuses. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He just looked at me, his eyes filled with a pain that mirrored my own. I read the file, he said, his voice thick with emotion. The parts they let me see. Silent Dawn. David, the things you've done. The man you are. He trailed off, unable to continue. He stood up and walked over to a small, locked box on his bookshelf. He opened it and took out a single, small velvet case. My father gave this to me when I made major, he said. He opened the case. Inside was a simple silver compass. He told me it was to help me never lose my way. I think I've been lost for a very long time. He held it out to me. I don't deserve to ask for your forgiveness. I know that. I broke something between us. But I want you to know this. I am proud of you, David. More proud than I have words for. And I am so ashamed of myself. I took the compass. It was heavy in my hand. I don't need you to be proud of me, Dad, I said, my voice quiet but firm. I just needed you to be my father. I set my boundary, not out of anger, but out of a need for self-preservation. The power dynamic, the one that had governed our family for my entire life, had been permanently, irrevocably altered. I wasn't the black sheep begging for scraps at the table anymore. I was the one who had rebuilt the table. And now we would all have to learn to sit at it in a new way. A year can change everything. After the storm broke, I didn't stick around. Couldn't. The house was too full of ghosts. I took a new position, a quiet transfer. I was still in the world of intelligence, but my role shifted. I became a senior consultant and instructor at a specialized training center in North Carolina, a place where the next generation of operatives like me were forged. The work was meaningful. It was a way to pass on the hard-won lessons of my past without having to live in the line of fire. For the first time in my adult life, I had a home. I bought a small house on a lake, with a dock and a porch. I had peace. The family was trying. The healing was slow, awkward, like learning to walk again after a bad break. There were no grand gestures, no tearful movie-like reunions. There were just small, fragile attempts to connect. My father would call, not to lecture or boast, but just to ask about my week. His voice still gruff but with an undercurrent of humility. My mother started sending me recipes, old family favorites, with little notes attached like, "Remember how you loved this as a boy?" They were small bridges, tentatively extended over the chasm that had separated us. I was cautious, but I didn't push them away. Eric got to keep his career, just as I'd hoped. The disciplinary board gave him a severe reprimand and a permanent mark on his record, but my testimony about his inadvertent role in catching Glade saved him from being discharged. He was transferred to a non-command desk job at Fort Bragg, not far from where I was living. We started seeing each other cautiously at first. We'd meet for a beer, talk about sports, the weather, anything but the past. But slowly, the walls began to come down. He was different, humbled. The arrogant edge was gone, replaced by a quiet thoughtfulness. He was seeing a therapist, he told me one night. He was trying to understand the roots of his jealousy, the pressure he'd felt his whole life to compete with a ghost. The real turning point came on a warm Saturday in the fall. I was having a barbecue at my new house, a small gathering with a few colleagues from the center. I'd invited my parents and Eric and Jessica. It was the first time we'd all been together in a relaxed setting since, well, ever. I was at the grill flipping burgers when Eric came over. He grabbed a beer and stood beside me, watching the smoke curl up into the blue sky. "This is nice," he said. "This place. You seem good, David." "I am," I said. And it was true. We were quiet for a minute. The only sounds the sizzle of the grill and the distant laughter of the other guests. Then he asked, That thing in the report. The one Hammond showed Dad. Operation Silent Dawn. What was that actually like?" It was the first time he had ever asked me about my world. Not with suspicion or jealousy, but with genuine, respectful curiosity. It was an invitation, an olive branch. I took a deep breath. It was cold. I began, my voice low. It was in the mountains of Austria. 3 days in the snow, not moving, just watching. Waiting for one man to make one mistake. I told him. Not everything, of course. Never everything. But I told him enough. I told him about the fear, the adrenaline, the impossible weight of knowing that hundreds of lives depended on you not blinking at the wrong second. As I spoke, he just listened, his eyes locked on my face. He wasn't seeing a rival anymore. He was seeing his brother. For the first time, he was truly seeing me. It was a quiet moment, but it was more powerful than any apology. It was the start of us finding our way back to being brothers. Later that evening, as the sun was setting over the lake, my mother came out onto the porch where I was sitting. She handed me a glass of iced tea. She sat in the chair next to me, and we watched the colors change on the water. "He's different now," she said, nodding toward my father, who was talking to one of my colleagues. "Quieter. He listens more." "He's not the only one," I said. She smiled, a sad, real smile. She reached out and put her hand on my arm. Her touch was hesitant, but warm. "I'm sorry, David," she whispered. And this time, the words felt different. They weren't just an admission of failure. They were a plea. "I know I can't take back the years, the silence, but I want you to know. I always knew you were carrying something heavy. I could see it in your eyes even when you were a boy. I was just too weak, too afraid of his anger, to be the mother you needed. I chose his pride over my son's pain. And I will regret that for the rest of my life." I looked at my mother, at her tired eyes and the lines of regret etched on her face, and I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't total forgiveness. It wasn't forgetting. It was acceptance. An acceptance of her flawed humanity and my own. "I know, Mom," I said, and I covered her hand with mine. "I know." The wound was still there. It would always be there. A scar to remind us of the damage done. But for the first time, it felt like it could finally begin to heal. It's funny how you can spend half your life running from something, only to find that what you were really running towards was a different version of it all along. I spent 20 years building walls to protect a secret, but the secret was also a wall that kept me from my own family. Tearing it down was the most painful and the most necessary thing I've ever done. A few weeks after that barbecue, a package arrived in the mail. It was from my father. Inside, there was no letter, just a simple dark wood frame, and in it a new picture. It had been taken that day on my porch. All of us were there. Me, my mom and dad, Eric and Jessica. We were all smiling. Not the forced, perfect smiles from the old photos, but real, slightly messy, genuine smiles. The kind that come after a storm has passed and you're just grateful for the sun. I looked at that picture, a whole picture with no one cropped out, and felt a sense of peace that had been a stranger to me for most of my life. I put the frame on my mantelpiece. Next to it, I placed the small silver compass my father had given me. He thought he gave it to me so I wouldn't lose my way. But I think he really gave it to me so he could find his. My family isn't perfect. We're scarred, and we're still learning. We're a collection of broken pieces being carefully, cautiously, glued back together. But we're doing it together. The truth is, I didn't fight all those years to be vindicated. I didn't endure the silence and the judgment just to prove them wrong. I did it, I realize now, for the simple, quiet hope of one day having a family again. Not the one I was born into, but the one we chose to build from the rubble. A family built not on pride or appearances, but on the difficult, messy, beautiful truth. And that's a mission that was worth every single sacrifice. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. We all have our own battles, our own families, our own struggles with being seen for who we really are. Have you ever been in a situation where you were completely misunderstood by the people who were supposed to know you best? Share your story in the comments below. I read them, and if you found value in this, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing so you don't miss what's next. Take care.